This is so much more fun when we're at Penny Lane and there's beer flowing.
On this episode of Transition Virginia.
Yeah, they're already packed.
The 2021 General Assembly session is a wrap.
You can't eat what you don't kill.
So what happened and what didn't happen?
Gesticulate wildly at them.
Solomonic third way.
The highs and lows of legislating in an era of Zoom.
This is one of the stickier elements of all this.
Forcing everybody to take a vote on something that they sort of were avoiding.
This is not a nonpartisan process. It's only a bipartisan process.
On this episode of Transition Virginia. Welcome to Transition Virginia, the podcast that documents the ongoing transition of power in Virginia. I'm Michael Pope.
And I'm Thomas Bowman. Today on the podcast, the 2021 General Assembly session is a wrap. What happened? What didn't happen? What's next?
We're going to break it all down for you with an all-star panel of journalists. Joining us is the legendary columnist for the Richmond Times Dispatch, Jeff Schapiro. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for including me. I am not worthy.
And returning to the podcast, our friend, the dogged politics and policy reporter for the Roanoke Times, Amy Friedenberger. Thanks for returning to the podcast.
Thanks for having me back on. I feel like it has been too long since I've participated in a podcast, and hopefully we can do one in person again someday in the future.
Yes, 100% agreed. Well, Amy, I want to start with you because you were there in the belly of the beast, in the Senate chamber. I have to admit, super, super jealous of you, Amy, because every time the camera panned over to that part of the Senate floor, there you were, like for the whole session, where I was locked in my house in front of my computer screen. Give us a sense of what it was like to be in that sort of makeshift ad hoc Senate chamber. What was it like to be there day in and day out?
It was kind of, as time went on, I felt like it seemed like this was the new normal for the Senate. We were set up, the House of Delegates was meeting virtually and the Senate was in person at the Science Museum. And so the senators were all spread out at their tables and the media was in a kind of a penned-in area. And so it's a little different. It's a little harder to kind of get people to come over to you. You have to gesticulate wildly at them to get their attention. And so, yeah, it was great. I'm a big believer, though, of being there in person as much as possible, just so they know that the media is watching.
Yes, 100% agreed. Did the gesticulation work? Like if you waved your arms, would Saslaw come over and talk to you, or how did that work?
Well, Saslaw is always coming over on his own. You don't need to get that man to talk to you. But the others, you kind of just have to keep waving or text somebody to say, hey, get so-and-so's attention. I want to talk to them. So, yeah, they would come over. I debated at one point getting a sign, but I didn't know if Madam Clerk would, like if I was holding a...
No props allowed in the Senate.
Yes, right. Piece of cardboard saying, come over here, Senator so-and-so.
Well, Jeff, let me ask the same question of you, but sort of in reverse. What was it like for you covering an entire session not being there in person?
I am wringing my hands, wondering what I missed, what we missed, because we weren't there, though a bow to Amy for bravely soldiering on. And Michael, you and I have discussed this. A lot of what we do as reporters, what lobbyists do, what legislators do, boils down to just sort of showing up. There's a lot of serendipity in our respective lines of work. And I'm afraid that with the virtual, the emphasis on the virtual, one thing that is not present is serendipity.
Let's talk about some of the bills that got passed out of this General Assembly session. What can Virginians look forward to starting in July or whenever they become law?
Well, goodness, there is so much that the Democrats accomplished in their second year of having the majority in the legislature and, of course, having control of the executive mansion as well. They're going to abolish the death penalty, which is a huge deal for a southern state to do this. marijuana legalization, kind of. You have to read through. If you don't want to read through the really lengthy, how many pages is it? 200 something pages.
200.
There's a lot of details to it. Basically, they're not going to legalize marijuana until 2024. There was a lot of pushback from, it sounded like, criminal justice groups and legalization advocates who felt like, they didn't go far enough on it.
Well, this is reefer light, if you will. There were about half dozen legislators Democratic legislators who oppose this, legislators of color. One of their concerns is, and I think perhaps the governor is going to address this in an amendment or two, is that with weed not fully legal until 2024, at least under the bill as passed, there's a whole swath of the populace that's potentially vulnerable to continued prosecution. And we've seen ample evidence that more people of color than white Virginians are busted for marijuana, and so I think this is one of the stickier elements of all this. I think largely overlooked. Essentially, it flared a bit in those final debates, is that this is not just Virginia becoming the first southern state to legalize marijuana. We would be joining 15 other American states. This is a step, as New Jersey took earlier last week, enacting a bill that will create a tax scheme that will generate a lot of money that is intended to go back into communities, principally communities of color, that have been adversely affected by the emphasis on prosecuting for smaller amounts of marijuana. And those dollars would essentially support jumpstarting this whole new industry, a recreational weed industry that would have a presence in these neighborhoods and perhaps enliven their economies somewhat.
I've got a question about marijuana legalization. I never quite understood the logic of waiting for the legalization part of it. I mean, I totally understand waiting for the commercial sales because you got to stand up the new agency and you got to create the regulations and that takes time. And okay, I understand that. Why wait for 2024? Why not do it this summer? Like, what was the logic behind not doing it now?
I think part of it has to do with, Amy working for a Western Virginia newspaper with a large rural readership. This is a state, despite the domination of its suburbs and cities, that includes a good deal of rural territory where Virginia's cultural conservatism endures. And I think that there is, particularly on the Senate side, there's a real attentiveness of this, that, if we're going to do this in Virginia, we don't want to do it in such a way that we appear to be ramming it down everyone's throats.
Virginia Democrats are really trying to position Virginia to put its best foot forward as the leading state in the New South. And so in addition to eventually legalizing marijuana, and in addition to getting rid of the death penalty, they're also taking some steps to address their past. And one of those things is getting rid of the bird statue sitting on Capitol Square. Jeff, what went into that decision and the debate there among the Democrats and the Republicans in the General Assembly? Was that controversial at all?
Absolutely. I think most telling about that legislation is who sponsored it. Jay Jones, a black Democrat, a young lawyer, legislator from Norfolk, who's also a candidate for the Democratic nomination for Attorney General. There is certainly a social justice element to this, but there is as well a note of political ambition driving it as well. The Byrd, of course, a segregationist, a governor before he was senator, and perhaps the the dominant political figure in Virginia from the mid 20s to the mid 60s. There are a good deal of nuance in this statue debate. That likeness of Byrd, not a very flattering likeness, I might add, is one of the senator holding a copy of the federal budget. And setting aside for a moment all that is associated with Byrd and massive resistance, the state's defiance of the Brown decision in 1954, that rather than desegregate public schools, Virginia took steps to close them. But Byrd was a figure who also modernized Virginia's government. He streamlined things. He got us to the short ballot. Now that Virginia only elects, three people statewide, three offices statewide, as opposed to I think it was 7 or 8. And that was all about clearly consolidating, his and conservative, large D Democratic control. But Byrd was also a stickler for balanced budgets and disciplined spending. And it was on Byrd's watch that the bond agencies began this grading system. It was 1928. And Virginia is the only state that has had the highest possible credit rating from Wall Street, AAA. It's the gold standard since that system was initiated. And to some degree, that's a result of the parsimony with which Byrd insisted Virginia manage its finances. And it is, if you will, to some degree, the parsimony with which Virginians have come to expect their elective officials to manage the public's finances. So Byrd, despite his troubling record on race, and by the way, one would point out that it was during his governorship that Virginia also banned lynching. That was a widespread practice in the American South, and it continued well into mid-century in what was once called Dixie. That there's a lot of nuance that sort of shapes Byrd's record, and that was mentioned maybe only once in debate, and that was by a senator from out Amy's way, Cree Deeds.
Speaking of senators out Amy's way, wondering about a bill that Senator Suetterlein had that I was personally interested in as a journalist, which has to do with election returns. I love looking at precinct returns to see where candidates are strong and where they're weak, and which precincts they do well in and which precincts they don't do well in. And of course, Suetterlein wanted to require all of those absentee votes, which of course exploded in recent years, to be recorded in their home precincts. Amy, what did you make of the debate on that bill and sort of how things ended up with that?
Yeah, that was one of only maybe a couple election-related bills that didn't go through, but one that I thought maybe a Republican sponsored that would make it. And from Senator Suetterlein's, telling is that, he is, for the record, not somebody who has been spewing the conspiracies and misinformation about the election, but he was hearing a lot from a lot of residents who are just very active in politics, so they're always looking, deep into the electoral returns. Just to see what the turnout is. And so, when all of the absentee votes were all dumped into the central precinct tally, it didn't really provide a good glimpse of how the precincts were voting and what the turnout was there. And so it can be kind of confusing for people to understand what's going down at the precinct level. And from his position as an elected official is that you want to know how people are voting for you. If you had a lot of people vote for you one year and then suddenly you take a deep dive in a certain area, maybe you want to spend more time doing outreach in that area if it seems like maybe the voters out there are losing support for you. So he had wanted to have, the precinct level absentee votes broken down. A lot of the registrars sort of complained about that, it would be a little more tedious to print out all these ballots by precinct level so people could do absentee. So it seems very feasible it just seemed like it was just meeting some resistance for logistical reasons.
Resistance in the House. So the thing that's really was striking about that bill is there was only one no vote. Adam Eben of Alexandria was the singular no vote in the Senate. So it was like not just popular, but very widely popular. But then the House killed it. So, I mean, I guess that's one of the things to, although I believe they tacked it onto another bill that was successful. It was Senator Deeds had a bill expanding the use of drop boxes, and they did put a sort of Suderline-inspired study onto that. So we'll study it and then have a report in December, and then so maybe in 2022 we can take action. So I guess it's not a total loss.
Yeah, it looked, the Democrats spent a lot of this session essentially preserving a lot of the pandemic voting access measures that they put in place for the November election. And that had to do with the ballot drop boxes, the prepaid postage with absentee, the quote cure process. So, if you send in your absentee ballot and there was some issue on it, a technical error, you still have the opportunity to fix it within a certain amount of time so it isn't invalidated. And so that was among those. The one that I was surprised that also went down in the House, Senator Favola wanted to permanently get rid of the witness requirement for the absentee ballot that are sent by mail. And that one, I think, also maybe got tacked on to part of this study that's going to happen. It was interesting, the legislature took the policy position that it was fine for the November election, but I guess they wanted to take more time to examine that issue before making it permanent, which was also peculiar because, there are quite a lot of states that don't require this witness signature. So I'm not sure what needs to be reviewed.
And one would note that just in terms of the nuts and bolts of campaigning, that institutionalizing many of the steps that were taken to, make for easier voting during the plague this past fall mean that an important aspect of politics will actually start a lot sooner and probably cost candidates more money. And that's voter mobilization, getting out your vote. Because we were all accustomed to voting in person, most of what we saw and heard from the campaigns were, people showing up at our doors, telephone calls, leaflet drops in the final run-up to in-person balloting. Now that that's going to be going on for days and days and days, it means that candidates are going to have to spend dollars and dollars and dollars, really pretty much from mid-September forward on an expense that traditionally was made much later in the campaign.
Okay, real quick, because we're running out of time for this segment, let's talk about what the legislature did finally to remedy some of the circumstances around COVID. After multiple attempts across multiple sessions, they finally extended some type of paid sick leave, this time, to the home healthcare workers and healthcare workers generally. Amy, can you tell us what the General Assembly did around paid sick leave?
Yeah, this is something that Delegate Elizabeth Guzman, who is running for lieutenant governor, has been pushing for quite some time. And she always had a much broader bill covering, a lot more workers across Virginia. And she had been gradually whittling it down, mostly because she needed it to pass the Senate, which is a lot more friendly to the business community than the House has been. And so it looks like it's going to be certain home healthcare workers. What is it? You might have to help me here on, it's like
They sort of narrowed this bill in a way that it does not apply to the private sector. So it only applies to the home healthcare workers that get money from the federal government. So it basically says to the private sector, hey, we're not asking you to do this.
Yeah.
And the impact of that is also it potentially is a big help for home health care workers who are dealing with a lot of lower income clients as well.
Yeah, and I think that'll essentially be the limit of that. I think that's all that she's going to be able to get through. I believe during some of the Senate debate, Senator Norman or maybe Senator Obenshain had asked if, what if Governor Northam sends us back with amendments to expand it? And I think Senator Saslaw said he won't vote for it. So I think she has reached the threshold.
Okay, well, one step at a time, and in segment 2, we'll get to some of the things that didn't happen this session. But we're going to take a break. We're here with journalists Jeff Schapiro of the Richmond Times-Dispatch and Amy Friedenberger of the Roanoke Times. When we return, we'll talk about what didn't happen and how that might shape our view of 2021.
And I'll tell you what doesn't help is when we have reporters like Michael Pope from WVTF. These were not rioters and looters. These were patriots. I never called the people who stormed the Capitol patriots. These were not rioters and looters. These were patriots. I never called the people who stormed the Capitol patriots. We have to hold our media accountable.
You can help our podcast hold people in power accountable. Head over to transitionvirginia.com and hit the button that says Contribute on Patreon. For as little as $3 a month, you can help us speak truth to power. And we're back on Transition Virginia. We're going to talk about missed opportunities, things left undone. What did not happen this year, and what do we make of that? So, open question here to the panel. What is the most significant thing that did not happen this year?
I think the one that a lot of people were expecting something to happen on because it was receiving a lot of attention was repealing mandatory minimums from the state code. The Virginia State Crime Commission at the beginning of this year had endorsed abolishing all mandatory minimum sentences from the state code. That's something like 200 plus offenses. When it came time that it was introduced in the General Assembly, the Senate had a version that was going to repeal, the vast majority of them, I think, except for Class 1 felonies. The House took a much more conservative approach, which I know that it's rare to say that they're taking the more conservative approach in the Senate, but they were mostly just limiting it to drug offenses and some firearm offenses. And so my understanding from talking with senators and delegates was that once that hit the conference committee and a handful of senators and delegates went to go discuss that, is that they were just so far apart that they just couldn't get around to doing anything.
So far apart how? Like, what were the different sides on that?
The Senate just really felt committed to it needed to be much more. From what I heard, the Senate was willing to narrow it down a little bit, but that it just seemed the House was not, willing to even go back with a pared down version of the Senate proposal. Delegate Mike Mullen, who was a prosecutor, he, had called the Senate version controversial. And so he gave a speech on the last day when they were closing out on Saturday, just kind of lamenting getting anything done on it. But I know that Senators Morrissey and Surville were really, also digging in their heels that it needed to be more comprehensive.
Yeah, and of course, this is all part of the kind of those larger debate. It's of particular relevance to the Republicans. And that is, the law and order themes that were really essential to the Republican Party's ascent or reascent starting in 1993 with the election of George Allen as governor, elected on a promise to do away with parole and require full sentences for felons. And there was a dust up on this toward in the closing hours of the legislature over the parole board and whether it has been sufficiently transparent in handling those few cases of parole eligible felons. In the city of Richmond, a police officer was shot dead in 1979. The individual who was convicted in that shooting was eligible for parole, was granted parole, but there seemed to be a lot of questions about how open the parole board was in handling this case. Mark Obenshain, a senator from Rockingham County up in the Valley, a law and order guy, if there ever was one, an unsuccessful candidate for attorney general, has been banging on this, or was banging on this issue in the final days of the General Assembly.
You know, another bill that failed was a bill introduced by Delegate Kelly Converse Fowler that made it through the House on cyber flashing. Now, this was one of the cringeworthy discussions from this year. You may remember last year there was a similar cringeworthy bill that had to do with massage parlors and happy endings, and there was some very difficult conversations that it was difficult to listen to, I should say. And then this year there was some, again, cringeworthy discussions about essentially sending dick pics and sort of prosecuting people for sending unwanted, obscene photos. Again, this made it out of the House. And then when it got to the Senate, there were the Senate panel killed it. And there was some hurt feelings there because there was, of the senators who killed it, they were all male. And there was this thinking that they didn't quite get what was going on. Amy, what did you make of that discussion?
Well, I will say that the Senate Judiciary Committee is always, I think, to me, the most entertaining one to follow, just because a lot of the senators come up with these scenarios that, could get, somebody could trap somebody in some kind of bill that they're putting through, sort of, these unintended consequences. And so, their position was that this language about sending unsolicited sexual photos is just so broad. And, proving intent, is really key here. There were just like, people were floating, somebody could send a picture of the statue of David and now you're going to get, charged as if that's really, what's going to start happening is we're going to have people, lined up in the courthouse over, pictures of artwork. But that was sort of what it was about. And I think it was a little hard to watch. It looked like the delegate was kind of just getting a little bit emotional, trying to plead with these older men who were sort of being a little dismissive, sort of seemed a little jokey at times, that she just wanted them to give a fair hearing to her bill, and they were kind of just ready to shelve it.
And you know what happened in that discussion that you don't see much of? The attorney for the committee was, I don't want to say he was dismissive, but I got the sense the lawyer for the committee didn't particularly like it or didn't necessarily like the way it was structured. There was something about it that he felt like maybe it wasn't complete or something. What did you make of that discussion?
Yeah, he was kind of posing scenarios too and took issues with it and seemed like he didn't have any kind of solutions to fix it up to deal with it then. So I don't know if this is something that's going to come back in the future. So we'll see.
By the way, if you think this is bad now, it wasn't too long ago that lawyers were in the majority in the legislature. And this sort of, shall we say, scenario building, which can border on the ridiculous, was really something of a high art then. But the optics of older guys talking about an issue with an apparent measure of levity, maybe, that is particularly startling for women. I expect we're going to be hearing more about that in a campaign context when come this fall when the House is up, but certainly in 2023 when some of these senators are standing for re-election in what we presume will be fresh districts.
Okay, regular listeners to the show might recall that Lee Carter came on to discuss his bill to repeal right to work. That endured some political machinations during the session. And what was all that drama and how did it end? Jeff Schapiro, I'll throw that to you.
Lee Carter, a self-identified Democratic socialist, tried to tack legislation repealing right to work to a bill on that was on the floor of the House. I guess he found out he just doesn't have that many friends in his own caucus. This is a hypersensitive issue among Democrats. Of course, the right to work law, it prohibits union membership as a condition for a job. It has long been an article of faith among politicians, Democratic and Republican. Governor Ralph Northam made very clear in a personal meeting with the head of the AFL-CIO, the Labor Federation here in Virginia, that he would veto any legislation that does away with this ban on compulsory union membership. And it is, to some degree, one of the issues with which Democrats somehow enhance their more moderate images. And so I think what you saw in that vote to stop this on the House floor was a very deliberate effort by Democrats to preserve that moderate image. That's not an interest of Lee Carter, again, as an avowed Democratic socialist, and an occasional Lyft driver. He's got a lot to say about working conditions, how friendly Virginia is to labor or not, and whether Virginia is supportive of things such as a more than a livable wage, but a substantial minimum wage.
I find interesting about that policy that Mike Allers, the Republican challenger to Lee Carter this year, actually supports repealing right to work. I find that notable about where the working class electorate is in Manassas City.
One thing that struck me about the debate on this is that Jeff Schapiro was talking about how sensitive this is, and it's actually, that's a sensitivity that cuts both ways, because you get the sense from Democrats they don't want to alienate their friends in labor, and they don't want to make their friends in labor mad, and they certainly want the support of their friends in labor. But they also don't want to make the business community mad, and they want to continue to get the support from the business community. So they are trying to sort of thread this needle in a way where they don't get anything accomplished because the governor would just veto it anyway, but they also aren't seen as opposing anything. So, it's a difficult balancing act they were trying to do.
All right, let's take a break. We're here with Jeff Schapiro of the Richmond Times-Dispatch and Amy Friedenberger of the Roanoke Times. When we come back, we're going to look at our crystal ball to figure out what might come next.
Hey, you. Yes, you. You're listening to Transition Virginia right now, and you're probably a fan of the podcast, right? Well, then rate and review, like Trevor Sutherland.
1 star. The only time I listen is when I'm on.
That's not really what I was thinking. Well, how about this review from Richard Krause?
This piece of shit podcast, I wouldn't even rate 1 star.
Come on, listeners. I know you can do better than that. Hit the pause button right now and give us a quick review. And we're back on Transition Virginia. We're going to peer into the future. The first thing we need to talk about is the immediate future with Governor Ralph Northam's role in the process. Now, he gets to consider all 900-something bills on his desk, and he can amend them just about any way he sees fit. What can we expect from the governor and any amendments that he might put onto any of these bills?
Well, we know for sure he's going to have something to say about legalization of marijuana. There's a good deal of hand-wringing over, the bill that was sent him, as we discussed at the top of the program. So that's something to look for as well.
Before we move on from that, any predictions there in terms of what the governor might do?
I would not be surprised if the governor chooses to, shall we say, encourage the legislature to accelerate the timetable by which weed is fully decriminalized.
This summer? So, like, in terms of possession being legal, that the governor might amend the bill in a way that would make possession of marijuana legal by this summer?
Perhaps this summer, or, maybe he comes up with some Solomonic third way that maybe shoots for, say, January 1st. To give everyone a little bit more time to wrap their heads around this.
And it's also nice sometimes to kick the enactment of certain things past the elections and when he's about to go out the door. So.
Yeah, in other words, leave it to a future General Assembly to basically have this debate all over again. Don't know about that.
Terry McAuliffe chimed in with something to say on this issue too, I believe, right? Toward the 11th hour.
Yeah, I think McAuliffe was trying to take credit for somehow moving along negotiations. This is a great McAuliffe tactic. I'm sure you all remember back in 2013 when Bob McDonnell was governor, a Republican who had been elected on this, no new taxes package plank. Ended up supporting a big tax increase for transportation. And McAuliffe, then an active candidate for governor, second go around, was front and center in terms of urging the legislature, Democrats and Republicans, to push forward this package of tax increases for roads.
On that issue of the marijuana bill and all of the many behind the scenes, closed door, not open to the public, not open to the press machinations that was going on with that conference committee. So you saw McAuliffe saying, hey, look at me, I'm part of this process. We did not see Governor Northam saying, hey, look at me, I'm part of this process. But undoubtedly, he was part of that whole negotiation, right? I mean, is it possible that he's already got his game plan for how he wants to deal with this marijuana Solomonic activity?
I mean, that's entirely possible. I know that, the press has widely reported that, Northam was, in on those final negotiations. And, a governor can do a lot of creative things with his amendment powers. And for the most part, the amendments that he's going to offer will be put to up or down votes on the floor of the House and Senate when all this is being reconsidered during the spring session of the legislature. That also means that there are fewer opportunities for mischief. And I suspect that that's something that the governor made clear to legislators as they were winding down on the marijuana legalization legislation.
Northam has been, I think quite savvy too, in sending down amendments that he knows that when he puts it to a floor vote, that he can get through. I think one of the most impressive ones was just the back and forth that we could not get funding a couple years ago for Interstate I-81, and it was tolls and it was taxes, and it was tolls and it was taxes, and then it ended up just being, another study or something. And he put them all to a floor vote on getting a revenue stream with taxes, and a bunch of Republicans even voted for it. So I think he's very good at being strategic, at forcing everybody to take a vote on something that they've sort of were avoiding.
As I said, the opportunity for antics diminishes.
So after all of the governor's amendments, there's the veto session. Anything we can look forward to there? I mean, any vetoes we might be looking forward to? Or, other than the marijuana bill, any other sort of big developments or other shoes to drop here?
Oh, I would watch the budget. There are lots of things that can be accomplished through the budget that the governor may use it as a vehicle for something that may have fallen by the wayside during the 46 days that the worthies were at work. And there's a lot in that budget that people prize, and that will be particularly valuable in this legislative and gubernatorial election year. One in particular, I was pleased to see our colleague David Ress down at the Newport News Daily Press and Virginia Pilot write about this, that I-64, which between Richmond and Hampton Roads is becoming, Virginia's answer to the Long Island Expressway, the world's largest parking lot, that it is now would be funded. There is in the budget full funding to fully expand that important stretch of interstate between Chesapeake and Richmond, which can mean a lot in terms of getting around, not just in terms of the economy, but tourism.
Okay, and there's also going to be another session on redistricting that we can look forward to. When do we think that special session is going to occur? And do we have any idea what the result might look like?
I'm not entirely positive, but we also probably will be expecting a special session action to expand the Court of Appeals. And I would envision that they maybe want to time that all together. They can't elect judges during a veto session. And so they had passed the legislation to do that. But Charnel Harry, the House Majority Leader, had wanted to take time to vet more judges. And so I'm guessing that'll happen a little later this year. So I don't know if they're going to try to get it all done together so we don't have just a whole bunch of special sessions going on.
Yeah. And the thing about judgeships, I mean, this is political patronage, and it is controlled by the majority party. The Constitution requires that judges are elected. That's the word in the Constitution. And, the Democrats, of course, having been in the minority for the better part of 2 decades, delight on planting on the bench as many of their friends and fellow travelers as possible. Republicans have tried to make a talking point of this, that what it means is that Democrats want to pack Virginia's courts with liberal judges who are going to be less tough on lawbreakers, particularly violent lawbreakers, than all of those Republican elected judges.
It's a little hard to claim that they're packing the courts whenever it's already stuffed with Republican appointees. So it's more like it's more like we're evening out the court, maybe.
With the expansion of the Court of Appeals and the likely domino effect that's going to have in some of the, shall we say, lower courts, the Circuit Court and the General District Court, it's certainly going to mean that Democrats have opportunities to put, shall we say, more like-minded individuals in these judicial appointments.
It's interesting in that many of these judges or judicial appointments, if they occur, would be potentially the first time many jurisdictions get actually deliberately liberal judges. Even the last Democratic majority was far more conservative than it is today.
Oh, absolutely. And I think that there's perhaps a larger issue here, particularly when looking at all of those Republican appointed judges. Many of them were coming over to the bench from prosecutors' offices. And that was very attractive to Republicans. But there was another reason for that. For a long time, anyone who was elected to a judgeship enjoyed a perk that those of us in the private sector would adore. For every year a judge sat, he or she would get 3 years or more credit toward their retirement. So it meant, that one could sit as a judge for 10 years, then retire and enjoy benefits that assumed he or she had been a judge for 30 years.
Tough work if you can get it.
Yeah, and what's happened is it's made for a very different judiciary, one that is rich in former prosecutors, and then a lot of younger lawyers who weren't much interested in the business of the law. In that profession, you can't eat what you don't kill, and it meant making a nice living with a 6-figure salary. And one in which one pretty much controlled one's day. Those were very appealing features of a judicial appointment.
One last topic here before we wrap it up. I'm curious about our predictions on how the census or lack of information from the census is going to shape things. There's one school of thought that says we might be looking forward to 3 consecutive years of House elections. I think nobody wants that to happen. There's another school of thought that says this year we would run on the old districts and then wait around for the new districts and the next election cycle, assuming we don't get the census numbers in time, which I think every day it seems more likely that they're not going to be around in time for Virginia to redistrict in time for the elections this year. Assuming we don't get the census numbers in time, what is our expectation in terms of this election cycle and future election cycles?
Take it away, Amy.
Well, I feel like you kind of laid it out there. I am firmly in the camp of, oh God, I hope we just don't just have elections forever. I feel like this is what we're heading toward. No, yeah, I feel like you laid out the scenarios of what we have to decide here, fairly soon. I think, there are people kind of preparing to run here. Now we have a lot of people running and primary challenges lined up. It all just remains to be seen.
This is not a nonpartisan process. It's only a bipartisan process. And I can imagine there might be a bipartisan desire to not run in 3 consecutive elections. It's going to be expensive. It's going to be a lot of work. And to your point, it's more opportunity to lose in a primary. That said, I can imagine Democrats might be salivating at the thought of being able to run in a federal year where they would have juiced up turnout.
Now, the last time this happened, in 1981, 82, and 83, there was an interim election for a single year term because the courts had found that Virginia had deliberately, under the Voting Rights Act, which then had considerably more teeth than it does now, had deliberately put in place plans that diluted the voting strength of Black Virginians. So that interim election was a form of punishment. We don't necessarily have that problem now, but we do have some procedural obstacles. So if you look at the Constitution, there's a language in there that requires that the elections are held in new districts. Well, it's not likely that we're going to have new districts in time. So perhaps some steps will have to be taken by the courts, maybe, if you will, a friendly lawsuit so that a judge could then direct the legislature to stand this fall in House districts that, are essentially the existing election districts. And that next year, there would be that process of redistricting under, again, this new bipartisan commission created under the Constitution by consent of the electorate. And then those districts would be in place for the 22 congressional elections and then in place in 23 for the next round of House elections, and then, of course, the next Senate elections.
Okay, let's leave it there. There's always more to discuss, but we got to wrap it up. We're out of time for this episode. If you have comments or questions about what you just heard, or maybe you only want to tell us what you think about the show, write an email and send it to us at transitionvapodcast@gmail.com so we can read it on the air. Subscribe to Transition Virginia anywhere pods are cast. Follow the Transition team on Twitter @TransitionVA and find us on the web at transitionvirginia.com. Don't forget to like and subscribe so you can enjoy our next episode of Transition Virginia.